I'm always super excited when I get to dive back into my Traitor Guard. I'm becoming kind of known for them at this point, and I will do anything to spread the love of one of my favorite factions, and hopefully eventually Games Workshop will take up the memo and make them for 40k. So today I am corrupting up and creating a converted and kitbashed Basilisk for my Traitor Guard. Games Workshop did help out because they sent me the Solar Auxilia Basilisk, but there are a lot of problems with this kit that won't work in 40k. So I'm gonna get my clippers out, my plastic cut out, and we're gonna customize this tank so it fits in the 41st millennium. And just like this massive war machine is joining my Chaos Army, war machines are joining Tacticus, the sponsor of today's video. But I gotta check out what's in this kit and see what I have to work with. So I had a little bit of time with the Solar Auxilia Lehman Russ kit, and as many know, this Basilisk shares several components from that kit. Mostly here it's the track assemblies, which I was comfortable setting about building first. As I mentioned in the previous video that I worked on that tank, these tracks go together a treat, and I just love the way these new vehicle kits are assembled. The process was easy, smooth, and the components all fit together beautifully. And I love the high detail on all of these newer tanks. And as I've also mentioned many times, this is something I wish would happen if we got new kits for a bunch of vehicles. The Predator design, for example, for Space Marines is getting pretty old, and the Chaos vehicles are not keeping up with the rest of the faction, so I'd love to see them replaced with some newer versions. One thing to note on this Basilisk kit for anyone looking to pick it up is there is in fact a fully detailed interior. So while it's not open topped like its 40k cousin, there are some amazingly detailed Solar Auxilia models loading the gun in the back of the compartment, and you can have a hatch on the roof open or the back door open. It's your choice. Now, once upon a time, I was the sort who would paint the interior on vehicles, even weirdly enough on Predators when I was young, only to glue the doors shut later. And after building some Earthshaker rounds for this vehicle and realizing that they went inside the vehicle, I decided that I would not be painting the interior. The planet my Traitor Guard fight on is an ash wastes, and all of the models wear gas masks, so it stands to reason that if they're out in the field, they would be closing all of the hatches and keeping the fresh air inside. This will save me a lot of time on painting things that nobody can see, but in this instance, it's also saving me some precious bits. People often wonder how you get a collection of cool greebles, such as these awesome Earthshaker rounds. Well, the way to do that is, of course, to keep them. So by not gluing these in as the instructions suggest to the interior of the vehicle, I now have a little rack of Earthshaker rounds. I have some other little bits and pieces that glue in there. They'll be really good for scratch building or terrain in the future. The rest of the build process for this vehicle was really smooth, putting it together and selecting the Earthshaker gun, as that is what is available for 40k. The Medusa rules are not easily found, and I imagine not going to be supported forever, so I'm opting for a regular Basilisk. I did want to make note of this perhaps error in the instructions where it tells you not to glue on the cannon. As you can see, I'm not really sure how this is meant to pan out because yeah, the cannon definitely needs to be glued. Maybe I did something wrong, but there's no way this is staying put. Once glued on, however, I did note that the gun was very saggy. All the instructions make it so that you can move the gun up and down, but the weight of the weapon just leaves it sitting flat on the ground. So as I was coming to the conclusion of this build, that was when I realized, oh my, I'm gonna need to do some serious conversions. And why is that? Well, it's because Games Workshop is insisting these days on making sure your kits are as uncompatible as they possibly can. I can't fathom any reason for this, but for some reason, the Horus Heresy Basilisk doesn't have a hull-mounted heavy bolter, much the same way as the Horus Heresy Lehman Russes don't have sponson guns. This makes it really ineffectual or awkward to use in 40k, even though it would be a fantastic alternate model as a solid sealed hull version of the Basilisk, which is admittedly becoming quite a dated kit. I find this approach not only peculiar, but it's also hostile to the consumer, and I really wish Games Workshop would kind of realize the error of their ways and stop. I've heard rumors that the different departments of the company kind of don't talk to each other or are competitive with their sales metrics, and I'm not sure if there's any truth to that, but if that is the case, it seems like a rather ridiculous reason to have all of these like anti-consumer practices. You're gonna sell a lot of Basilisks to 40k players who want to take this alternate build that would look great with Deathcore if they just had a heavy bolter. But with that realization, it meant I needed to make some choices, and I wanted to give you all a couple of options for how I could see you easily changing this. If you want to go for the simplest method to make this Basilisk suitable for
40k, it would be to give it a heavy bolter. The 40k Basilisk cannot take a heavy stubber, which means a pintle mount is out. And conveniently, the Horus Heresy tanks for Space Marines have heavy bolters as a pintle weapon option. So what I would do is simply do some minor conversions, maybe chop and change the mounting, just so you can take the heavy bolter pintle mount from the Space Marine kit and mount it on the rail for this Solar Auxilia Basilisk. But I opted for something more complicated. As I mentioned, we're on an ash waste, so leaving those hatches open for too long is only for those crazy zealots like were on the previous tank that I made. So I came up with two other options. And these options were to use the turret for the Taurox or a Baneblade extra turret sprue that I have lying around. Now I built a Forge World Glaive and it replaces a whole bunch of parts from the Baneblade kit, and somehow along the way I've ended up with the two little guns that sit on the side of the Baneblade that usually get mounted with glass cannons. So I figure one of these turrets might fit really nicely on the right side of the vehicle here with a heavy bolter mounted in the front. Another option I've come up with is the Taurox, which is an Astra Militarum transport. The Taurox has a small turret on the top, and I figured you could mount a heavy bolter on the side of it if you just get a heavy bolter from many other kits, especially vehicle kits. Sponson kits from Horus Heresy, 40k, or perhaps the pintle mounts again. I wanted to show you these options and show you how non-destructive they can be. A lot of conversions can be really expensive, but it's good to show you ways to do this that are quite cheap. If you're collecting Horus Heresy or have friends that are, I'm sure you can find one of these heavy bolters to do the pintle options really easily. And if you're an IG player, the Taurox conveniently has a build where you mount the autocannons on the sides of the vehicle. So if that's the aesthetic you prefer, you may well end up with plenty of these little turrets left over. So both of these options are actually non-destructive and don't make the kits that they come from unbuildable, which is a really good thing for conversions. So ultimately, I've decided to go with the Baneblade turret. I think this is the perfect piece. It's the angles on it and the rivets that make it feel like it fits in with the shape of this Basilisk, but there's quite a few conversions and chopping and changing I'm gonna need to make this fit.
So if you love vehicles in 40k as much as I do, you'll be excited to hear that Tacticus is adding them in their Machines of War expansion. We're getting vehicles and monsters for the first time in Tacticus, and I'm really pumped. I'm a daily player. I have been since I found the game in August. Leading the Tabletop Time Guild, it's super fun and I really enjoy it. These Machines of War are added in the 6th slot and sit off the battlefield and get to use their active abilities to devastating effect. The first 3 have already been announced. We've got that Tyrannid Byrivore, the Malleus rocket launcher for the Imperial Guard, and of course, the Mighty Forge Fiend for the Black Legion. Machines of War goes live June 10th, so start prepping your rosters now. But if you don't already play Tacticus, why don't you check it out? It's a really cool hex-based tactical combat game with over 50 unique characters, and there's new characters getting added all the time, and I believe Khan the Betrayer is coming very soon as well. There's PvE, PvP, multiple game modes, and yes, you can unlock everything free to play, or you can boost your progress with battle passes, whatever suits your playstyle. We have a special code you can redeem to get some cool goodies, which is TTT05MOW. It's on the screen right now. The link is in the description. Go check out the Machines of War and start playing Tacticus, and join in the game that Murray and I play every day and are in love with. And while you start downloading Tacticus and checking out those Machines of War, it's time for me to get back to my machine of war, the Basilisk.
So there's the hatches that go into the vehicle that are completely in the way here, and I'm gonna need to mount the turret on the right side, and because I'm anal about these things, this turret's still gonna need to be able to rotate. So I just use a knife and some files to carve back all of the detail and end up with a flat surface. And as you can see, when I removed some of the elements on the vehicle, it left a nasty hole all the way through to the base of the plastic. But that's fine because I'm going to cover it up a little bit later. I do want there to be ways for the driver to evacuate the vehicle, so I decided to reposition the hatch doors further down and closer to the driver's compartment. I imagine this small turret is operated by a tank commander who pokes up into it, and the turret itself is too small to have a hatch on it. This will mean that one of the doors on the hatch won't be able to open unless the turret is turned sideways, but one of them will, and I'm sure a person could squeeze out of that gap in a desperate escape. However, this is completely acceptable for military vehicles, which often had really cumbersome and awkward ways of doing things due to space being such a premium feature. And perhaps this turret is in fact a battlefield adaptation that is a little bit poorly suited for the chassis that my Planet of Traitors came up with themselves. I cut plasticard the shape to create a new mount and just raise the elevation of where the turret will be placed. I wanted to preserve this cable detail on the top, so I carved into it in several places, especially towards the turret where the shape of this brick would stop the turret from being able to rotate. Once I'd carved away enough that it still looked okay and I was sure the turret would be able to rotate in theory, I then just used some plasticard to clean up and hide any of the damage I'd done. For the turret, I grabbed one of these half bolters. You end up with quite a few of these if you build large vehicle kits, especially Horus Heresy or 40k, as these bolters clip into sponson mounts. And I believe this one is either from the Baneblade itself or the Kratos tank. I've lost track. I just carved the back down and filed it until it was flat and then glued it onto the little turret. After all of this work, I am definitely sure that the pintle mount was the clear, easy #1 option for this, but I kind of like the little dinky turret I've made. My Traitor Guard and a lot of the stuff I like about tank aesthetics is from that weird interwar period between World War I and World War II. There are a lot of Russian tanks in particular, as well as British tanks that were really wildly experimental, playing with multiple turrets, strange configurations, and that's where the idea for this mini-me turret came from. This small turret with machine gun is inspired by tanks such as the American M3 Lee, as well as tanks like the Russian T-28 and T-35. But overall, I think this really is the 40k M3 Lee that I've made, with this large self-propelled artillery gun as well as the small turret on the top. With everything repaired, patched, the turret glued on, and me happy with the shape, it was time for me to chaosify this Traitor tank. And there isn't much room on these really nice new models. One of the downsides to having all of this gorgeous detail is there aren't many big flat panels for you to play with. The panels are simply too small, which means I had to lean on my relics, the etched brass sheets, where I grabbed a few chaos stars and panels to add all over the vehicle just to give it a little splash of chaosification. Being a self-propelled gun, I was really excited to be able to finally add a chaos trophy rack. They're so iconic, those spiky trophy racks, and usually look quite silly. But I think when used in moderation, they can be a really nice accent for these kind of vehicles. And without having to worry about a large main battle turret rotating around the tank, I can imagine them putting a trophy rack at the back just above the gun housing. I also found 1 or 2 chaos stars in plastic that I could fit onto the model, and had to give a special shout out to my new favorite bits pack, the Bretonnian box from Warhammer the Old World, because I grabbed one of these lances, shaved down all the detailing on it that made it medieval, and kept this pennant flag for the turret. This adds a little sense of motion and height, and I think looks really nice. Also, the fact that it's tipped with a spear makes it look vicious and spiky like chaos. The last touch for the top of the heavy bolter was to add the hunter-killer missile filling out its war gear. And then for a bit of fun, I added 2 spiked chaos hooks to the back of the vehicle and then hung a las gun in them for any desperate soldiers who need to grab a weapon while they're manning or equipping or unbogging or repairing or doing any number of things that you could do on the backlines with a self-propelled gun. With all of these conversions in place, I'm ready to take a look at the model and then prime it for painting. So my conversion is all done and it's time for me to paint it. And a lot of people wonder how I get that extra special Traitor twang in all of my models, and it's actually the paint job that really sells that. The key is to use the right base tone. So when I paint chaos, I always use chaos black. It's the only way to inject the appropriate amount of heresy into the undertones of the model. If I was to use something such as Space Wolf's Grey, there'd just be too much goody two-shoes under the surface.
So for the full paint job of my Basilisk, I of course followed the same scheme for the rest of my army. And if you'd like to see a comprehensive version of that for painting tanks like I do for my Traitor Guard, I've done a Lehman Russ video and I'm putting a card up here so you can go check that out if you'd like. But I want to talk today about a couple of changes I made and the little updates. And one of them was really important in these foundational early steps as I'm establishing the gray with dry brushing. While I'm still doing a fairly quick job of this, I'm trying to put a little bit bit into practice of what I learned from Byron at Adepticon. Now, Byron from Artist Opus showed me how to use dry brushes a little bit more effectively. And while I still need to work on my patience and blending, especially for large vehicles like this where I want quick results, I did find that it allowed me to build up these gradients of color to a highlight a lot more effectively. I ended up taking this highlight further than I did with my previous tank, as one of my critiques on my own work was that I felt that from a distance, the limb and rust kind of blends into each other, as there isn't enough contrast in all of the dark grays on the armor. So by pushing those highlights up more and towards the edges with the dry brush, I was a lot happier with the grays I used on the tank. The second main area of modification I've made on this vehicle is how I painted the metals. I learned a lot starting to play with true metallics with my Exodus paint job for Arc Open, and I decided that instead of relying on a solid base coat and a sloppy Nuln Oil wash for the army painting technique for some silver, for such a large barrel I'd instead mix in some black paint with some dark Iron Warriors and use that as a foundational tone, and then stipple on increasingly bright blends of the metallics towards the top. This creates a much more rugged and battle-worn metal appearance with a much nicer gradient across the whole barrel, rather than relying on washes which just sink to the bottom and then overly stain the metallics, completely removing their sheen. These two areas were the main differences in the paint job, but overall I think that one thing I do like about the Basilisk design is there's a lot more cables and little bits all over it, so there are more elements for me to paint in some interesting different colors. While you watch me wrap up the paint job, I thought it'd be cool to talk about some of my ideas for my army as it keeps going. This Traitor Guard thing has turned into a bit of a series, and it's been really fun to share them with you. Their loose name has been the Unbroken Chain, but I'm thinking about diving a little bit deeper into creating some fan lore for them. I like to keep their contact and connectivity with my Alpha Legion a little bit subtle, keeping it to a few symbols as well as the colors I choose with the teal, as I imagine actual Alpha Legion operatives only deal with very few select people on this world. I do like the idea though of this planet being on the fringes of the Imperium and under the yoke of Imperial tyranny. As such, a lot of their equipment has a bit of a hodgepodge vibe. A lot of the gear they're using is salvaged or personally maintained, as they've cut off connections with a lot of Imperial worlds. As well as that, they've just started to receive a trickle of strange supplies from their Alpha Legion allies in the Dark Forge of Charybdis. By using older marks of vehicles, such as the Solar Auxiliar ones, I can create a really nice theme across my army that makes them feel a little bit different from the average Astra Militarum force on the table. If I was to do another Basilisk, I would probably use the pintle mounted gun option for the heavy bolter, just to make them look like they were all battlefield modifications and strange esoteric marks of vehicles that weren't necessarily signed off by the Mechanicum. I'd be really keen to know what you would like to see next for my Traitor Guard. Are there any particular units you'd love to see converted up for 40k and get that chaos flavor on them? I'm really open to pretty much everything. The idea for my army is that they are very much a line fighting artillery company with armored support, so they aren't equipped with special characters or wildly esoteric equipment, and veteran squads aren't particularly common. However, pretty much the entire codex and indexes are open to me, so whether it's Earthshaker carriages from the indexes or a squad of Kassakan from the standard range, I'd love for you to help me choose what I build next on the channel for my Traitor Guard. And while you were hastily typing out your comments and suggestions, I managed to finish up this model, and it's time to check it out with some reveals.
And we wanted to thank all of our patrons and remind everyone that if you want to support the channel and help us keep doing this for a living, your support is immensely appreciated. If you'd like to join up and join our exclusive mini Discord, chat with us, or perhaps participate in the monthly mini review, the Patreon link is in the description. So it is done. I'm really happy. I hope you like the reveals. I hope you like my Basilisk. It does have a little issue with limpness. It does have a little issue keeping it up, but other than that, the Basilisk is really cool. I recommend if you do your conversions at home, probably glue this at the angle you want it to be, because once it's in, nothing contacts anything else, so it doesn't really glue. Otherwise, it's been super fun making this weird and wacky interwar inspired M3 Lee of a Basilisk. If you can think of other Traitor Guard projects you'd love me to tackle, I'd love to. It's my favorite army to work on right now. It's my Alpha Legion or it's my Traitor Guard, and both of them are really getting my juices flowing. So there's that box of Solar Auxilia, Vexillari, or whatever they're called, Velventatar. They're specialists, and I think they'd make great Traitor Kassakan. Thank you to Tacticus for sponsoring this video, and thank you to all of you who have watched it. Stay tuned for more projects from us every weekend, and see you on Tuesday as we round up the week and have another topic to discuss. Bye all.